Hello, everyone, and I want to welcome you to another episode of the Better the Pond Pondcast, the Flying V edition, where we talk to incredible people who are creating impact and ripples on the pond. My name is Warren Berry, and I'm your host and the founder of Instinctive Solutions, where we believe that everyone is an odd duck, but that's what makes them awesome. Today, my guest is Ketan Kulkarni. Born in Poona, India, Ketan grew up in a time of simple living and higher thinking. His family then migrated to Canada and became a physician, author, researcher, multiple international award winner, and it was all about meaning, contribution, and impact. His book, The Legendary Quest, really gets to you, makes you think and reflect about what really matters, and takes you back to your authentic self. Ketan believes that if we start teaching these simple principles in school, we would all live a much healthier pond. Ketan believes that if we start teaching these simple principles in schools, we would all live in a much healthier pond. Thank you, Ketan, for everything that you do to better the pond. Ladies and gentlemen, Ketan Kulkarni. Ketan Kulkarni, all the way from Halifax, Nova Scotia, physician, author, you're a researcher, international award winner. You are all about meaning, contribution, and impact. Ketan, it is an honor to have you on the Better the Pond podcast.
Well, thank you so much, Warren, for having me. The honor is entirely mine. I think, I've always enjoyed our conversations. We haven't chatted for too long, but this is a real pleasure and honor to be here and chat with you about, the stuff that I'm involved with, and hopefully that all the audience find it very interesting.
I'm sure that they will, because I mean, really, let's jump right into this. Like your book, The Legendary Quest.
Yes.
Was fantastic. I read it on an airplane, but the book itself really made me think, and it really made me reflect on, authenticity, impact, character, all those things that really made me stop. And that's one thing I loved about the book, is it made me stop, reflect, think, and then take action. And whether I'm taking action in the way that I am continue to do so, or take different action depending on what I reflected on. So I think just even that one thing alone, Ketan, of writing that book and really making people stop and think, that is impact enough. But there's all these other wonderful things that you're doing as well, and that's what we want to showcase today.
Well, thank you so much for talking about the book. I mean, that's exactly the purpose. I mean, I've never heard a better feedback on the book, that exactly was the purpose. Like, how can we get people to just take a few minutes, few hours, few bunches of hours, and just look at who they are, what they are all about, and truly identify that authentic self and reflect, just deeply reflect. And yeah, I think you put it perfectly. I almost wish I could record that and just have it for people to listen. That look, you could be a mega millionaire, you could be an international superstar, or you could be just a Joe Friday. It doesn't matter. Everybody needs that kind of reflective work, and we can all get slightly better and enjoy lives even more while making purposeful contributions and adding a lot of meaning. It's not very long. It's only 100 years, maybe, right? I mean, so we have to figure out how to have most meaningful impact on ourselves and everybody we meet.
Yeah.
Or don't meet with the internet,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Even more so. So the good news is this is recorded, so we do actually have that.
That's true.
We have that snippet. But I do want to say something before we really jump into this. This is the first, however, how I've approached the podcast. But one of the things that happened in my life, Ketan, was there was a chunk of my life where I was doing things which at the time I really loved doing, and I was in my medical practice, and I was enjoying the work, and I was enjoying the impact. I was enjoying helping people, and then eventually that kind of that sort of started to waver off, and I did. I'll be honest, I kind of got bored, and then I jumped into the work that I'm doing now. And one of the things that I found really interesting about it is people would always talk about, find something that you love to do and then find a way to make money at it, or find your passion and everything will follow it. I used to think it was so cliche. I thought it was, yeah, that's good in theory, but until I found it, until I experienced it, and I went, there is such a truth to this, right? So I can sincerely say that that I get paid to play. I get paid to love what I do. And so it's not cliche. And one of the things that was interesting about reading your book, it really helped me put some of those things into perspective.
Mhm. Mhm.
And again, we were going back and really reflecting and said this, there is a truth to this. And
Yes,
when you
absolutely.
when you do that, your energy changes.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to thank you for that.
Well, thank you. You're very, very welcome. And it's so true. I mean, sometimes, no, it's not a critique, but it's a misconception. Some people came to us and said, well, that's Eastern philosophy. And, should we really trust it? Well, it's not Eastern philosophy. It's a universal philosophy. I mean, the Japanese call it ikigai, the Toltec tradition calls it something else. The Mexicans call it something else.
Mhm.
The mainstream Europe and North America call it something else. But it's truly about being grounded and identifying where the blind spots are. And in the book, we call it, authentic inner excellence. That sounds like a mouthful, but it's all about really knowing who you are, understanding our core values, identifying what's important for you in the moment. And it's not like it's bound in, or it's cut in stone. I think you're allowed to change that, right? As we evolve and get more mature, we need to periodically do this so that our life is in alignment. And, we try to argue in the book that when you're aligned internally with, being able to appropriately manage your thoughts and emotions and, responding rather than reacting to your circumstances, like you said, changing your energy. We're all energy ultimately, right? I mean, E equals MC squared is not a theory. It's real science. I mean, we're all energy vibrations. When we break ourselves apart, we ultimately become vibrations. And it's very well known that, good stuff increases our vibration and bad stuff decreases our vibration. So if we align and vibrate at a better frequency, for lack of a better word, ultimately it's going to lead to outer excellence, which all of us want to experience in abundance, right? I mean, who doesn't want to be successful and financially well off, and really experience authentic personal growth, and also do some good work with purpose and meaning? So I think those are universal needs. But when we tried to do the book, we couldn't find one resource that put it all together in a simple language, and that was just evidence-based without any kind of rara. So, the tone of the book, like you said, is reflective, right? It just says, okay, well, this is what the evidence is, this is what it suggests. And let's break down this terminology and make it ridiculously simple, so you could read the book on an airplane, you could spend 6 months with the book, you could spend 6 years or decades with the book. It's still going to do the job. Or, when you're stuck with money, you open the chapter on money and say, okay, yeah, well, where am I stuck? I still do that because I still forget. I said, oh, well, what did I say about gratitude there? So it's like a companion, right? The idea was like, okay, well, what's the evidence? What's the timeless evidence around this? How can we put it simply? And then how do we access it whenever and wherever you want? So, I always have a copy, and I know a lot of other people have a copy. And, as actually we're celebrating 1 year anniversary this month, and we're just kind of rereading it just to see what we said and whether anything needed to be changed in the book. So, I mean, certainly we are looking at taking it to the next steps and next level by adding some of the more practical stuff that's coming in future. But the theory, I think, holds because we didn't create the theory. It existed for centuries, if not millennia. So we just did the job of trying to put it together with our scientific lens, and I think it's been very gratifying. It took us good 2 years to synthesize the evidence and present it in a way that everybody can sort of derive from. You don't have to be a physician or a lawyer or an accountant or a medical practitioner to get use out of it. I think it's for everybody. Every average Canadian, every average global citizen can access it and really transform their lives. I think it's not meant to be exclusive or elitist or unreachable in any manner, right? It's actually quite the opposite. It's for everybody.
Absolutely. I was just going to say, you made me think of, never underestimate the power of simplification.
Yeah.
And right. And I really think you did. I think you took a lot of concepts and a lot of elaborate theories and thoughts and really simplified it down into something that's very digestible, very easy to read. And so you simplified it, and I think you guys did a great job.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. We really appreciate that feedback.
So, all right, so let's get into this now that we've talked all that time. But tell my audience sort of a little bit of all the things that you're doing right now, Ketan.
So this is quite interesting. So I still have an active medical practice, and I still take care of my patients. I'm engaged in very active research, in the medical field. First, let's talk about that.
Mhm.
So, I do have students and I do active clinical and translational research, and I'm very well published, fortunately. So that's all going great. But, through that journey, it was quite interesting that, after 14 years of training and several years of very achievement driven focus, I realized that, like you said, that was not enough, and it wasn't enough because I was compromising a lot of other aspects of my overall personality and identity for that one thing. And I experienced burnout through all of this, and then I started really recognizing and understanding what my identity was all about. I did not need to pigeonhole my identity to that of a physician. Too often, if you have a number of alphabets after your name, you get pigeonholed into that identity. I'm the corporate, you know whatever, elitist lawyer, blah, blah, blah. I'm the tax expert of Western Canada dealing with this, that, and everything else. I think it's a very risky business because you're pigeonholing your identity and really hinging, like it's the second chapter of our book, right? You're too entitled for your title. And
Mhm.
there's no need to be, I think, I learned so much more from my non-medical friends that I cannot thank them enough. The broad perspective of life was so important to me at the time that I went on to do several years of leadership training, and then went on to become a coach, and then really went on to realign myself. And that's also how the book was born, to realize that I was always interested in entrepreneurship. I was always interested in content creation. I was always interested in creativity, and of course purpose and meaning. So outside of the medical world, which is now even more aligned with what I want to do, I don't any longer look at how to make my CV longer. It's already long enough. Like I want to see how I can meaningfully impact patients and how I can create meaningful research. That's like the core of the agenda. But outside of medicine, I was able to start building my teams and really start getting into entrepreneurship. I'm very keen on working in the area of affordable housing, having active businesses that would be able to focus on sustainability and longevity and contributing to Canadian economy. So that's the entrepreneurial sphere is the other sphere, and the third sphere is that of coaching and content creation. So as I became a coach, it was interesting. First I thought that maybe people really need the theory. So it's all great. I mean, the legendary quest puts the theory, but it soon became clear that even that's a lot, right? I mean, people are also interested in simplifying it even further. So for example, some people say, well, this is all great, but can you tell me a story? First, I kind of brushed it off saying, well, you at least have to put in the effort to read a book. But then I said, well, no, they're right. I was missing the point. Not everybody can assimilate the theory that's presented in the legendary quest. Some people need it to be told in a different format.
Mhm.
So now, that's the, we finished our second book, which is going to be released in the summer. And that's going to be a transformative journey of an eagle who's called Soar. So
Mm.
Soar undergoes this enormous transformative journey. And we've done, I don't know if I reached out to you for beta reading, and maybe I should, I'll maybe connect after the podcast. But we've had a lot of beta readers read it and they really enjoyed it. So if you're anybody seeking something, you're on a quest to do something, you've experienced or are experiencing a transformative journey, it goes through all the concepts of legendary quest and weaves it into an inspirational fable. So if you've read anything like Jonathan Siegel or The Alchemist, you would love it. Like
Mm.
it would take you through that world of deep reflection in a very entertaining, simple way. Like you associate with what's right for you and you let go of what's not right for you. So that's sort of the next step. And then we are also looking at so I was talking about the questions people were asking me, right? So 8 out of 10 questions that were coming to me were all financial. Like a lot of it is, well, I'm really into debt. Where do I invest? What do I invest? How do I do it? So now we are also with the legendary quest uh, concepts, we are also expanding a little bit in the sphere of financial education and what to do, like the practical know-hows, and how do we create platforms for people to be able to invest, to be able to find the right people for advice. So it all seems scattered, but it's perfectly organized. I think it's the entrepreneur sphere, it's the coaching and content creation sphere, and it's the medical sphere. So I think my job is to try and balance all of those and try to weave a rich pattern, and also I enjoy Canadian art. I've always been an art collector, so now my focus is more on the Atlantic side. But when I was training in Edmonton, it was more on the Western side. So I have fond memories of going to art shows, and I also do some music. So that all sort of gives me more energy to sort of focus on all these spheres. So like we say in the success chapter of the book, it's not about how much you achieve in one area, but it's about the reason pursuit of enough, that how can you weave a rich pattern. You cannot have $10 billion and have all failed relationships. Those people are going to be 100% unhappy. Or you cannot have all just great relationships, but you're broke. That's not going to work either. So I think it's whatever pattern that you think is great for you, identifying that, and then striving to achieve that in your life. So that's sort of what I'm working on. I think it's a process of consistently improving, more than anything else.
I love it. I love it. So now what I want to do is I want to get to know you. So Ketan, I want to know what got you from being a gosling. And I'm talking like, where were you hatched? Where was your very, very beginnings to when the time that you left the nest? So that by the time that you decided to either got kicked out of the nest, number one, or you decided to leave on your own, to where you are today. What is your backstory, Ketan?
Backstory in terms of like the career, or
you? Where were you born? I'm going to start there. Where did you begin
yeah.
your life?
No, that's a great question, and I always enjoy answering this. So I was born in the 80s India, in western part of India, where in so many ways it was exactly like Atlantic Canada, or exactly like medium to small places in Canada. There was a rich fabric of the cultural network. You had the community support. Education was very important. There was strong relationships and families where they not just focused on money, but they focused on value. Value focus was big. Ethical and moral education was huge. So I was schooled through that system. And through the course of my long medical training, me and my family immigrated to Canada, and then I continued training and retraining, and eventually became a subspecialist. And then, I think several nests were changed along the way, right? Because I moved a number of times along that training, and then, finally I landed in Halifax on my first medical professional job back in 2014. And that was a big, breaking the egg or whatever, because that's when, after a long time, me and my wife were able to start laying some deep roots, and we really loved it out here. The people were fantastic. Like, in Maritimes, it has happened so many times that if you talk long enough, somebody in common, or, you don't know somebody, and by the time you're done, their three generations, and they know you about your three generations. Like, it's really funny. I mean, people complain all the time about discrimination, this and that. And yes, there is probably those problems that exist, and we all can do better at that with our own cognitive biases. But I think it's such a fantastic place for anybody to really experience the rich Canadian culture. I mean, there's so much art, there's so much in terms of entrepreneurship, there's so much in terms of music, there's, you name it, right? I mean, you have sports, and you have water sports, and you've got the ocean, and you can really thrive and survive and really find a fulfilling way anywhere in our country. I think, we're so blessed. Like, anytime I leave for a travel or for meeting, like I was in Europe earlier this year, and, anytime you have to show your passport, like, half the times you can read that they want to know how to get to Canada, Like, anybody who finds out that you're from Canada, their next question is, well, how do I get there?
Yeah.
I think we're so blessed. Like, we might have our problems, but we are really, really blessed, I think, for what we have. And, who doesn't have problems, right? It's unlikely that anybody has no problems. So, that was a big shift in my life, that, I started my medical career. And then in a few years, like I was describing, I had the opportunity or the privilege or the challenge to have the need to rediscover myself and connect back with my roots. Because, I think through the 14 years of training, as I migrated many nests, I lost my broad vision. I think I've ended up becoming very tunnel visioned, like a lot of my colleagues do, that, you're focused on being a successful clinician researcher or whatever. And often they forget about the fact that comes at a cost of often ignoring other things in life. So I think I had the unique opportunity and privilege to connect the Canadian and Indian values, which are very similar. I think, it's all the same, like, the community support and the purpose and the contribution and the meaning and the wealth of relationships, and the volunteering that can happen and the innovation that can happen. So it's like going full circle, right? While I now live on the opposite side of the globe, I think technology offers us a chance to connect anywhere in the world, and that has given me the opportunity to really discover and connect with people like yourself. So I really enjoy, meeting new people and, making new connections, making my tribe bigger. It's like, I don't really care what somebody's education is or how they look like or where they come from. I think it's who they are and what they think about it that resonates most with me, and I think that's how I have been able to create very meaningful, impactful relationships, and even if you've met somebody a couple of times, sometimes it's such a lasting impact that I think it's fascinating. So that's who I am today. I think I'm just like any other Canadian, looking to do my best in my lifespan and make purposeful and meaningful contribution.
Okay, so now that's a lot. So now we're going to unpack this. I'm going to take you back. So my first question to you, Ketan, is was it a town, a city, a village that you were born in? How big was it?
Oh no, it's a big city actually. It's a big city. It's called the city of Pune. It's a
Okay.
big historic city, or they spell it in English they spell it as Poona, Pune. It was the educational hub in the country. They have universities dating back centuries, and they have enormous history. I mean, I think they have unbroken history of millennia, right? So it was a very historic place. I was part of a very sort of working class family, humble family, but again, woven in rich fabric of education and values and moral and ethical education. So the mantra for the 80s India was simple living and high thinking. It's quite fascinating to see that, and today it has changed. I think it has become I visited India within the last year for a brief visit, and I could see the difference that just in a few decades they have certainly become a lot more capitalistic, what we would call more westernized, that it's more individual focused. It's a lot more capitalistic economy. There's malls with all kinds of gadgets everywhere, and all kinds of luxury goods that are being sold. But that fabric has definitely changed in the last few decades, and it's quite fascinating to compare and contrast both worlds, I think.
Yeah, I can only imagine. So were you an only child? Do you have other siblings?
No, I do have I do have other sibling. I have one younger sibling, and she does she's an engineer, and she works in mechanical engineering field. So they kind of go back and forth between the U.S. and India. So both her and her husband are in the same field.
Oh, okay.
Some sort of affinity there.
All right, and so now growing up in India, and I think this is fascinating what you just said, saying that 80s
Yeah.
India was very simple living, high thinking, very community, very values based. I can see how you can relate that to Canada, because there's a lot of the same,
Yeah.
I mean, the same concepts. And yet, as you went back, recently, you saw how capitalist it was, so how much that's changed.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
um, and I guess I guess Canada has as well. So, but I want to sort of take you back and say, when you were growing up those high values and whatnot, what was it like for you, even as a teenager growing up in that time?
Uh, yeah, I think it was really good, because one of the things that I would point to, and that's very interesting question, I think, without trying to go too tangential, I think we are seeing an unprecedented level of, mental health issues that are increasing, and, a lot of addictions that are going up, and in a very early age, right? We see that, a lot of community statistics will show you that in Canada. I think what happened, or what was true at the time, is that the community and the social fabric took care of that, right? I mean, if you smoked a cigar, your family knew before you came back home. Somehow, I don't know there was no smartphones, but they would already know that you were messing around somewhere, So I think the community, it was almost like I don't like to call them barriers. I think they were safety nets to
Mm.
help people really be grounded and like I still remember my mother used to tell me as a grade 8, 9, 10 or high school student that, this is the time to really work hard and build your skills and, really gain the discipline and the grit and all of those things that you're going to need in future life. You cannot study for 15 hours a day when you're in the 40s and 50s. It's going to be much harder, right, to gain that skill set. And I've heard that from so many now, fast forward 25 years or whatever. I heard that from so many other world-class experts, right? Musicians and singers. I mean, when people ask them, they say, yeah, when I was 14 to 24, I practiced 16 hours a day or whatever. They don't practice 16 hours a day when they're 75, but it's all the deep, impact of habits or, purposeful practice that they had back then that created that lasting, so I think it was all about quest for excellence. So the chance that you would go astray and acquire bad habits or challenges was much lower than now, because the high rise, like I call it for fun, the high rise culture, because everywhere there's like thousands of apartment buildings. You wouldn't know what's happening next door anymore.
Mm-hmm.
That's so confined to your block in the sky. It's a bit like Halifax, that it used to be a bit like Halifax, that it's just houses all over the place. The neighbor was aware of who's that kid, and you're kind of going around, and there was no policing. There was not even moral policing. People just were looking after each other.
Mm-hmm.
A little bit like smaller towns. Like Regina is like that. Like very community feel to it. So for a growing teenager, the other part of the story is that just maybe it's the population pressure, or it's the economic pressures that people have. Like we didn't have too much money, or we didn't have any luxury goods as growing up, or it was just the quest for getting better. It was a very competitive culture, and it remains like that even now. I mean, all Asian countries, I think they're probably all very populated, right? I've seen that. Japan and other places, you can almost call them hyper competitive. The bar is very high.
Mm-hmm.
Like unless you're the top 1%, you're not making it into any premier institution.
Right.
Like we start rolling eyes in Canada when the selection criteria takes the top 5 or 10%. People start thinking it's unfair. But if we compare that with the global competition, it's really easy. I'm not trying to trash our hardworking people. I'm just showing the comparison that there's places that will only take 0.1% of the applicants, and it doesn't mean the rest of them are garbage. It's just that the cut point is very high because they have the population, they have the ability to compete. But with that comes, that builds the resilience in you, that builds you grit, that builds you. It's like an Olympic gold medal, right? I mean, if you're going to get there, you're going to compete with the best, and it's very important. So I think with the good social and moral fabric, there came the hyper competitive culture, because you were not getting ahead unless you were the top of the pile. Just top of the pile is not enough. So that also comes with the cost of. I now think that they could have I could have experienced better all-rounded development had it not been that hyper competitive. So I really appreciate that in Canada, that people, teenagers and young adults have the opportunity to not just have to be forced working in one direction. They can focus on all-around development. So I think that's huge in our country. We have the privilege to give people a chance that they don't have to necessarily be hyper competitive. They can build up all areas of their life. And that's also, another important piece of the Legendary Quest book, that, I think we need to introduce those concepts in high school or even earlier, right? I mean, we need to build that fabric early on. And that's why, right now we are sort of spreading our wings in the awareness space, that, how can we take all this knowledge, simplify it even more, and bring it on early, that's going to be part of future work, I think, that. And I think it's for everybody, right? It's for all over the globe. I mean, we've got 8 billion people, or 8 billion plus people now. So that's part of the global mission, I think.
Yeah, I think, but you said something really fascinating to me. It's really got me thinking about, saying about the hyper competitiveness and being the top of the pile. So just being the top of the pile isn't enough. And in that, if, for those people at the top of the top, yeah, they'll go on and they'll excel and they'll learn and they'll grow. That's fine. But the people that don't, so the people that are even so what about the people that are underneath the top? So I'm wondering, because it just seems like in that hyper competitive nature, we're all chasing and we're chasing and we're chasing and we're chasing.
Correct.
And within that, I mean, especially with the younger people, now if they don't achieve, now does that end up being mental health issues and addictions and all those things, because they can't get there?
No, I agree. And that is another thing, one thing if I could have changed, like I said, is that extreme hyper competitiveness comes at a big cost. I think we are paying a big cost for that, like, yeah, maybe the system globally is selecting for the hyperachiever type people, that are just going to achieve no matter what. But that probably isn't a healthy parameter, right? Even those people suffer from, high rates of depression or suicide or heart attacks or whatever other disorders. And then, like you said, there's a huge number of people that are probably excellent, but they didn't, for whatever reason, they were not well or something happened, they had a bad time. They didn't meet the cut. But that doesn't mean in any way, I think, that they are no good, right? I mean, they are still quite good. And to me, that really highlights even more the need of the concepts around legendary quest. How do we build a broad framework for success? We should not measure success. Like, that's one thing I had to really process through my journey, that success cannot just be measured in terms of achievements, right? It's much broader concept than that. And if we apply this broad comprehensive framework of success to people, then I think a lot more people will succeed in their own way. I mean, I think there's the common, like I love Albert Einstein, and one of the common quotes that he uses, like, if you measure the ability of a fish by climbing a tree, the fish is going to fail, right? I mean, there's no way.
Right.
So I think the fish needs the swimming competition or whatever it is to really excel. And the cheetah needs the running competition. Like, I mean, I think we need to develop a culture of excellence where people are able to thrive with the skill set they have or they can acquire. And I think that's a big global need, and that's a strong mental framework and a strong community framework and a strong success framework will really help us battle a lot of the distress that people experience. Because that's where the book starts, right? I mean, we say that most of us experience some form of distress most of the time. It's just a fact that, how many times can people claim that they're sitting like they're Zen or nothing is wrong with them? That's very uncommon. Most of the time we are planning and preparing and something is happening. So it's quite interesting. I find that fascinating.
Absolutely. So there's two things I would is one of the I have to do a little bit of a shout out because just on this point, I was talking to a gentleman yesterday, Martin Sosha, and he was actually on my podcast as well, and we were talking about people in the trades. And we're talking about getting kids in the trades, and I think this is really fascinating. And I'm just going to go back to my history as when I was a teenager, and there was a school here in Regina, it was Cochrane High School, and it was more of a trade school. So they had automotive, construction, welding, machining, and so but that's where the dumb kids went, and I feel horrible just saying that, but that was how it was viewed.
Yeah, it's
Right?
the old concept.
Yeah, right. It was like, well, that's where like the bad kids went there, the troubled kids went there, the troubled kids went in the trades, and it really, I sit back and I remember at the time as a kid, we just had this conversation yesterday. I said that never sat right with me. Like this makes no sense. And so, and now we're in a situation where we're talking about this hyper elitist, and don't mistake skill for intelligence.
No, not at
And
all.
so there's people that are, they're really academic and they get up, but what about the people who are highly skilled at working with their hands, but yet but you don't see them rise to the top. And right. So, I think going back to what you're saying about being in schools and getting the younger people to understand that level of success, right, is their level of success,
Yep.
not what, this elitist or this societal aspect is. So I just wanted to mention that because I think it's really really valuable.
Yeah, no, I agree. And more and more data, like, I can criticize the high IQ societies because I'm part of them. If you're part of them, you criticize them.
Yeah.
So I think, IQ is a terrible predictor of success. You can see so many high IQ people not successful in life because, IQ is just a measure of ability to perform in a certain context, right? I mean, that's insufficient. Maybe it's necessary, but it's definitely not sufficient for success. So, I love to talk about this because, and I think the other aspects are so important. I mean, EQ is one of them. I mean, emotional intelligence is so important, right? I mean, I wish I knew EQ much earlier than I had known. Like, I didn't know anything about EQ when I was 10 or 12 or 15. I wish I knew it.
Right.
And now they're coming up with the success quotient, right? I mean, which is a mix of smart and hard work. And really being able to work with teams, having meaningful relationships. So it comes down to a framework of crafting success, right? I think, and I think, being Canadians, we cannot underestimate the value of, and I mean it in a broad sense, not in a racial term, like the value of privilege. I mean, Canada is a privileged country, right? We have the privilege with our forefathers and everybody investing decades into bringing us up. We have the privilege of being a developed country, and that is, it's phenomenal, right? I mean, the 24/7 clean drinking water and this and that, and the security and the safety, and the ease of travel with Canadian passports, like it's all privilege, right? I mean, somebody in Cambodia or somewhere in the Africa, they cannot even imagine that, right? I mean, unless you belong to an elite family, there's no comparison. So we could say all day long, that do this, but if they have no physical capacity to apply that, it's difficult. Or the war-torn countries, or wherever there's geopolitical challenges. I mean, no amount of work in this territory is going to help them. They first got to come to a certain level that you're able to think. Like for example, in the Victorian era, we know that when people made it to a certain level of wealth and civilian status, suddenly there was art and culture that flourished, because now people had spare time to start thinking about, how do I write the new tone in the piano, or how do I paint a new picture? So I think it's this is getting super fascinating. I don't want to keep going, but we could talk about this 6 hours.
We've only got so much time. And
I know.
on that note, we might have to do a part 2 to this. But I'm trying to be a good steward of time. So I got one more question for you, and then I'm going to move on to the next one. But it's interesting. Your mother said to you about about hard work and find your skills and develop your skills. That was the lesson that your mother taught you.
Absolutely.
What was the message that your father taught you?
I think well, what was the message that my father taught me? I think they went hand in hand. They went very much hand in hand. He basically, my mom was a stay-home mom, so there was more physical time to connect, but my father demonstrated the same concepts through his work, right? Because he was, at the time, to meet ends, he was working 2 jobs. He would do his day job, and in the evening he would teach. But I saw him teaching, like the poor kids would be taught for free. He wouldn't charge them any money. And like I saw all those principles factored in. He wouldn't care, like it was not just all around monetary stuff. It was all around getting the skills, making sure that you were the best version of yourself that you could be, and also making sure that you took care of your finances. That was getting obvious, because they were working hard to meet their ends, so they wanted to make sure that we did okay financially, that they didn't care if you were whatever figure multimillionaires, but they wanted to make sure that we got educated and made sure we were able to fend for ourselves, without having to ask for doles or whatever else. So I think it was quite interesting. I think a lot of learning also came through your social circle and family very passively, right? I mean, you learn from others' mistakes, or you learn from the good and bad things that other people did. So I think the messages were overall consistent, is how I would put it.
All right, excellent. All right, so what is the greatest thing that has happened to you, positive or negative, that's ruffled your feathers, and how did you respond to it?
That is a fascinating question, I think. One of the things that, our systems are very complicated. And, at one time point, what happened is that somebody I required a reference letter for a very important thing. And I really trusted somebody to do it for me. And they said, yeah, no, this is great. And, it's all fantastic, and we'll do it. And what ended up happening is that they wrote a terrible letter of reference with a lot of factual errors and this and that. And they never thought I would find out. So the thing happened anyways. And as the situation happened, the committee actually allowed the candidates to review their applications, and so mine was quite a great application. So they talked about it. So I said, okay, well, is there any chance I can see it? They said, yeah, it's your application. They had an open review system. And, lo and behold, I read this letter. I said, what is going on here? And like, this makes no sense. So then I was really devastated by that, I really lost trust in the system. And I felt that, well, This is backstabbing and abuse and red tape and discrimination and you name it, all the terms that would naturally come to me as a reaction. But instead, interestingly, I'd already started on my journey of leadership training and this and that. So I said, well, wait a minute, maybe I'm just reacting to the situation. So I chose not to react, but I chose to respond to it, by reaching out to a lot of mentors and coaches, and a lot of colleagues for support. And I described the situation and and then sought advice on how to navigate it. And that, I think, was deeply transformative, right? I mean, I reread some of the literature around choice, and some of the horror stories of Holocaust survivors, and how they consciously made the choice of forgiveness, and how they moved on and transformed their journeys. I mean, Man's Search for Meaning is a great example. So that was a really dark event that happened. But in turn, I was able to really leverage on that and not make it about that person's wrong, but making it about what can I learn from this and how do I make myself better. And I think it was one of the key events that helped me really find out more about my identity. Like, what do I want? Do I need to react and go after that person? Or do I, fly high, get better, do what I want to do, and really surround myself with a tribe that's supportive and that can tell me that, well, you're doing this wrong. You want those people, right? I mean, I want those people and colleagues and friends to tell me, no, this is wrong. You're just not getting it right. Instead of patting on the back saying, yeah, don't worry, go for it, and then stab you at the back. So it taught me very deeply the value of meaningful relationships, the value of aligning myself strongly so that even if there was criticism, that's okay. I would still stand up for the right. And one of the big things it helped me was to stand up for others. So now I'm part of a lot of wellness, well-being committees, and really standing up again. Like it's any form of discrimination. Sometimes it's power abuse. Sometimes it's just negligence. So sometimes it's just like or dislike. So how do we stand up in solidarity against unfairness and lack of equity? So I think that build gave me some solid tools to really develop some skill sets in those areas, which I'm still learning. So now I wouldn't say that I'm in the Zen level, but I think I would respond better to a challenge now. They say, okay, wait a minute, something's happening here. Let's either talk it out or let's respond to it properly. So I think it definitely gave me the strength to learn how to turn around things. I mean, there's innumerable other challenges, but that was very contextual, I think, in today's discussion.
Absolutely, and I love the fact that you took a very negative situation, and I mean I talk a lot about react versus respond,
Yeah.
And when you think about it, they did you a favor. Now it didn't look like it at the time, but they're but having the negativity and all that actually leveraged you to grow. And sometimes we get so wrapped up in trying to react to I'm gonna react to this and I'll make them wrong, and now we got two people fighting. No one ever wins a war. So you actually took it and then leveraged it and made something better out of it, and I think that is a great lesson for people to really pay attention to.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, this is really great discussion, and I think this is important, right? I mean, the more people like yourself that I have around me, the better is my support system. And then the better I can deal with challenges, because I say, hey, what do you think about this? This is what I'm currently facing, instead of suddenly reacting. And a lot of conflict can be resolved simply by heart to heart talk, but it doesn't happen, because people don't feel that they have safe spaces. I think it's also around building safe spaces, right?
Yep, absolutely. So this leads right into my next question, is so that geese fly 71% further and faster when flying in the V formation. So what do you think is the secret to getting, your team, you call it your tribe, flying in the V formation? What do you think the secret is to helping create that alignment?
Yeah, I think I have two answers. So I think one is transparency and the second is accountability. And the fabric that binds the two is trust. I think, so trusting relationships, I think the geese can fly beautifully in their formation. I need to be able to, I don't need to be at the apex of the V, but, I need to be able to trust that things are going in a perfect way. And I think I learned a lot of those ideas from the business world. Because, when they talk about high performing teams, I mean, those things come out consistently, that any team that is consistently high performing, you see that people trust their leaders, the leaders trust their teams, they're very transparent on their mission. They hold each other accountable. You can't just be the boss and walk away as like your problem. They hold hands. I mean, that's one thing we experience. Some of my partners for work or for business or for whatever, one thing we had to agree on is that, things are going to go wrong. Sometimes I'm going to make a mistake. I bought a painting and it's fake. I didn't do it purposefully. It's going to happen. So I have to be okay with your mistake, or you have to be okay with my mistake. And you have to be okay with the burn in the pocket. So I think that's a fundamental part of trustworthy relationships, that it happened. It's like, well, let's learn from it and not do it again.
Right.
But it's going to happen. Like somebody does something. But I have to be able to trust that they are doing the right thing.
So trust really is the cornerstone.
I think so. I was talking with a very senior friend of mine who used to work in car dealerships. He ran car dealerships, and he always consistently came at the top of the charts. And, his man, I was like, well, how do you do it? He's not a pushy person. He would just stand by and let you walk away if you didn't want anything. He said, you know what? When I ran my teams and whatever, I said, you know what? Forget about all your numbers. Just look at the person and, build meaningful relationships with the customer. You're almost certainly going to succeed. I mean, like one of the companies that does that quite a bit is, I think, the Bose audio systems. I think they do a lot of that. I think Bose never went public because he did not. That's what I've heard from my friends who work there, but I've never verified it. But that's what I understand, that he never went public because he did not want the stress of having to pay dividends and compromising quality or whatever for profit. So I think it remained as a private company, and they consistently created impact. But they have a loyal fan following. It's the same with Apple. I think they make it so seamless for their customers. I mean, you can criticize them whatever you want, but it becomes so seamless that you're almost certainly going to buy the next Apple when you want to transform, because all you got to do is connect the two, and then you don't even have to enter a password, it's like all transplanted to the next phone. Like, it's phenomenally incredible because they are making user experience as their center point. And then we all consciously, buy more expensive Apple products because it's seamless for us.
Right.
So I think it's something to learn.
Well, I think even saying about Bose not going public, and really it becomes people over profit.
Yeah, exactly.
Right, people over profit.
As they say, I think what they call it, it's not key performance indicator, but it's knowledge and power and connecting people and all of that. So you know a lot more about that than I do. So.
All right, so let's get into this. So we talked about this a little bit earlier, but what are you doing, Ketan, right now to better the pond, and what ripples are you creating out there?
I think I think a lot of that work is happening in all the three spheres we talked about. But I think the coaching content creation is where I think a lot of ripples are happening. I'm trying to really partake into more public facing, social activities and international advocacy efforts to really raise the awareness around so many of the issues we just talked about today. So that's where most of the ripples are happening. And I think I really do trust that, despite the capitalism or the extreme, I mean, we just saw who the biggest billionaire is in the world right now. We shifted to the luxury goods person. Bernard Arsenault, I think, is now the most wealthy person in the planet. So I think more people are going for the luxury items. So I think the need has never been more urgent. There's nothing wrong with them. I think it's fine, but I think we cannot have them at the cost of everything else. So I think there's a huge need of awareness on the fact that we all have a choice, right? I mean, how do we exercise that choice is what's going to determine our outcomes. So that's, I think, the thing that we are hoping will create big ripples. So the partnerships are happening. There's some traction. So I'm quite excited about the content creation and coaching piece. And the other pieces, there's also a lot of work happening there, but I think that's very topical and exciting.
I find it interesting that talk about the luxury items and trying to achieve and chasing these things, and I really appreciate the fact that you're bringing this back. You've said it many times, like finding your roots and getting back to who you are and getting back to getting it back to basics.
Yeah.
I really appreciate the fact that, you know, even with the book, that's what you're trying to bring back, say, who are you, right? Versus who do you think you need to be?
Yeah. Yeah. No, absolutely. So
And that, I mean, and those ripples, I think that those ripples go a long way, because that becomes generational, not just
yeah.
individual.
Yeah, I mean, the Japanese literature is very clear on that, right? I mean, they have shown that, you know, you often acquire a lot of your sort of thoughts and habits and actions from your grandparents and parents, you know, more than anybody else. So it's a big deal.
Yes, absolutely. So, Ketan, what's one lesson that you've learned that you'd want to share with an entrepreneur starting a business today?
I would say just start. You know, I think one big thing I should have done earlier is that just get started in my 20s.
Mm, just start. And I think, you know, what's one thing that's funny about that is when you start, you're going to suck at it, right?
Yeah, it's
You're going to
fun.
make mistakes. You're going to be awful. You're going to, you know, but you're going to learn. But I agree. Just start
Yeah,
somewhere.
absolutely. You know, and that's the lesson I'm learning and have learned, and I've been trying to share that, you know, it's never going to be the perfect time. You just got to get going.
That's that's true. It never is the perfect time. So I've one last question for you, and then we'll kind of
Yeah.
wrap things up. And so my question is, Ketan, if you were standing on the top of a mountain and the whole world was listening to you, what would you say?
Uh, so am I allowed to say anything, or it's just in
You're
particular context?
you're allowed to say anything. What would you say? The world's listening to you.
I would just say two words. I would say trust yourself.
Trust yourself. You want to expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, so I think it goes back to the concept of the Legend Request book, right? I think we have too much noise and too much, you know, socio-cultural norms that try to tell us what to do and what's right and what's wrong, you know. And by trusting ourselves, we would align more with our authentic self, and, you know, align more with our values, and align more with doing the right things and having, you know, meaning and purpose in life, instead of, you know, chasing some illusionary goal that's just going to become meaningless when you get there.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I mean more by trusting yourself. That, you know, one of the lessons I have learned is that things always work out. They don't usually work out in the way you think, but they work out in some way.
Mm-hmm.
If we truly, you know, are in alignment with those goals, you know, somehow you're going to get there, you know, in some form, right?
Mm-hmm.
Uh, you know, we have to learn to, like, it's like entrepreneurs, right? I mean, they trust the unknown. They trust that they're going to get somewhere. They trust that it's going to work out, and they're willing to risk a lot for it. And not everybody needs to be an entrepreneur, but I think we can derive from those principles of trying to, you know, do our best and really learning to trust our skill set or acquire the skill set that you need, and then leading our journeys with the heart, right?
Right. Absolutely. So this is really interesting from our conversation today, Ketan, because listening to your backstory and talking, you know, think about your mom and your dad is like working hard, finding your skills, being the best version of yourself, finding your roots. Really, when you think about it, all those basics, those very simple basics, is really the legendary quest, right? It's traveled that test of time from when you were a kid to as you are as an adult now, and you're passing that and you're paying that forward. I mean, that's how you're bettering the pond.
Yeah, no, I agree 100%, because I think those are timeless principles, right? I mean, they always were there, and they probably acquired them from their families and in the past. And I think our job is to just, you know, keep passing the baton, you know, and keep creating the ripples.
So, a couple different things here. So, number one, we want to talk about just real briefly that you're been nominated as a top 25 Canadian immigrants for 2023. So we got to get
Yes,
that out there.
just as of today.
As of today. How is this timely or what?
Yeah.
So you know, you can get out there. That's on LinkedIn, so we can, well, and I'll tell people how to find you, so we can look and see, you know, vote for you to be top
Yes,
five.
I would appreciate all support for it, because I think all 75 finalists are phenomenal, but
Mhm.
that's within the rules of the competition. All support is appreciated.
Absolutely. We got the Legendary Quest, which is the book that's out. So you can find that what Amazon and
Yeah, Amazon is the easiest way to find it. It's right there. And they do a phenomenal job, I think, of printing it on demand and sending it right away.
perfect. And they got a new book coming out. You said this summer, is that correct?
Summer, yeah. We hopefully sort of tail end of the summer is our plan.
Okay. So we'll be watching for that.
Yeah.
And so Ketan, I want to really thank you. Honestly, I was really looking forward to this. So I really want to thank you
Me
for
too.
your time and your stories. And if anybody wants to find you, where do they go to find you?
I think LinkedIn and Facebook are the easiest platforms, and I always respond. So feel free to reach out, and I will respond.
That's one thing I will say. When I watch your feed, you always respond to people. You always take the time to do that, and I just always respect that, because you're keeping that line of communication open. You're keeping the relationship open, and you're building your tribe.
Yeah, thank you. No, I appreciate that. I learned that skill from some of my mentors and some of the members of the tribe, and I think it's very important. People need to feel like they are heard.
Yes, absolutely. All right, well, there you have it, folks. We had a great time with Ketan today. And this is Warren Barry, and I'm flocking off to take you beyond the pond to better the pond, because we're better together. Thank you, Ketan.
Thank you. Have a great day. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.